Hello, and welcome back to the Bible Difficulties and Answers podcast. I'm your host, Lance Smith. Today we're going to explore a question that has puzzled Bible readers for centuries. Why is Isaac referred to as Abraham's only son in Genesis 22:2, even though we know Abraham had another son, Ishmael? Is this a case of divine favoritism, or is there a deeper theological truth at work here? Stay with me as we unpack this mystery through historical, theological, and spiritual lenses to uncover why Isaac truly held this unique position in God's plan. Now, this particular verse might not be a major point of debate for atheists, but it holds significant weight for the three major monotheistic religions, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. In today's episode, we'll take a closer look at how each of these faiths interpret the verse where Isaac is referred to as Abraham's only son. We will also review the Jewish Midrash to gain deeper insight from rabbinic commentary and explore what the Quran actually says about this key incident, the binding of Isaac, uncovering the theological nuances and implications within each tradition. Let's begin by reading Genesis 22:2 from the New Living Translation. Take your son, your only son, yes, Isaac, whom you love so much, and go to the land of Moriah. Go and sacrifice him as a burnt offering on one of the mountains, which I will show you. Okay, now the problem, as defined by the Big Book of Bible Difficulties, is this. Abraham was told here, take your son, your only son, yes, Isaac. However, Abraham had Ishmael many years before, as we see in Genesis 16, and he had other sons, as we see in Genesis 25, verse 6. Now, at first glance, this verse seems confusing. After all, Ishmael was already born, and later on, Abraham even had other sons by concubines. So why does God call Isaac Abraham's only son? Let's begin with the solution from the Big Book of Bible Difficulties, which is this. The other sons of Genesis 25 were probably born later, being mentioned 3 chapters after Isaac is called his only son. Furthermore, they were sons by the concubines which Abraham had, again, as we see in Genesis 25:6, and were not counted as heirs of God's promise. Likewise, Ishmael was conceived in unbelief by a concubine and not counted as heir to the promised inheritance. In addition, the phrase only son may be equivalent to beloved son, as we see in John 1, verse 18, and John 3, verse 16. That is, a special son. God said clearly to Abraham, "For Isaac is the son through whom your descendants will be counted." All right, that's some good information from the Big Book of Bible Difficulties. Let's dive into some contemporary research regarding the apparent contradiction of Isaac being called Abraham's only son despite the existence of Ishmael. And today we'll break down 5 key interpretations to help explain this mystery. Let's begin. The first explanation is the theological interpretation. The Hebrew word translated as only, yahid, can mean unique or beloved, rather than literally the only child. Isaac is considered Abraham's special son of promise, through whom God's covenant would be fulfilled. This makes Isaac unique. Clifton H. Payne, Jr., from his 2004 article, The Only Begotten Son, makes several really technical points regarding the theological interpretation. And let me attempt to summarize his key point. In the Hebrew Scriptures, the word only, yahid, is often used to refer to an only child or someone who is unique, lonely, or precious. The Septuagint, a Greek translation, sometimes translates yahid as beloved, and the Greek word is agapitos, instead of only begotten, as seen in Genesis 22. This translation is notable because it's the same term used by God for Jesus at the Transfiguration in Matthew 17:5, highlighting Jesus as God's uniquely beloved Son. R.C. Sproul, from his July 9, 2024 article, Abraham's Great Act of Faith, says this: Abraham had taken steps to make sure that this promise was fulfilled with the aid of his wife Sarah, who, regarding herself as barren, offered her handmaid Hagar as a surrogate mother, so that Abraham could have a son in order to fulfill the promise. Hagar had a son named Ishmael, but he was not the son of promise. Christian apologist Matt Slick, from his July 4th, 2020 article, Why Did God Tell Abraham to Kill His Son Isaac?, writes this, and I quote, "Let's examine the chart. Both Isaac and Jesus are called the only begotten son. Of course, Abraham knew he had a son named Ishmael, but it was not Ishmael who was the son of the promised covenant. It was Isaac." And again, that's Genesis 17:19. That is why God called Isaac Abraham's only son. Plus, Isaac was representing the future Messiah. Jesus was also called the only begotten son. Also, both Jesus and Isaac were offered on a hill, and most scholars that I have read agree that it was the very same hill upon which they were both offered, though around 1,800 years apart. End quote. That's good. But sometimes maybe we miss the really easy and obvious solution. That's what Bodie Hodge did in his article, Contradictions, My Two Sons, where he says this: sometimes we miss the obvious answer as well. In the previous chapter, Genesis 21, Ishmael was sent away. So in chapter 22, Isaac was Abraham's only son, for his other had gone away, presumably never to return, under Abraham's household, end quote. Could the answer be as simple as that? Possibly, and I admit the simplest answer is usually always the best. But I think it has more to do with Isaac being the son of promise, for which God's covenant would be revealed, rather than Ishmael simply being sent away. So, theologically, Isaac's status emphasizes his unique role in God's plan, rather than diminishing Ishmael's existence. The second interpretation is legal status, and that's rooted in legal custom. In Genesis 21, Ishmael and his mother Hagar were sent away from Abraham's household at God's command. From this point forward, Isaac became Abraham's only son under his care and authority. Legally, Ishmael was no longer part of the household, reinforcing Isaac's unique status. To further this explanation, the evidenceunseen.com website, in their article, Why Does Genesis 22 Refer to Isaac as Abraham's Only Son?, says this, and I quote, "In chapter 21, we find that Ishmael and Hagar were legally separated from Abraham. Sarah demanded of Abraham, 'Drive out this maid, Hagar, and her son, Ishmael, for the son of this maid shall not be an heir with my son Isaac.'" Genesis 21:10. Later, God told Abraham, "Through Isaac your descendants shall be named." That's Genesis 21:12. And God promises to build a nation through Ishmael also. We see that in verse 13. After being legally separated, Ishmael has no contact with his father Abraham until his burial in Genesis 25:5. This event in Genesis 22 was not a mistake. In fact, God had predicted that he would choose Isaac, not Ishmael, for his plan, which we read in Genesis 17:19 through 21. He even predicted them by name. From God's point of view, he had only provided one son for Abraham, not two. Ishmael was a creation of works, not faith, end quote. So, in other words, legally, Isaac is the only son left in Abraham's household, which reinforces his special covenant role. All right, the third area is what's called source criticism. And for those who delve into biblical scholarship, some argue that this story originates from what's known as the Elohist source. According to scholars like Joel Baden, the Elohist tradition may have emphasized Isaac as Abraham's only son after Ishmael's banishment, focusing on Isaac's role in the narrative to underscore the divine testing of Abraham's faith. Now, this is a really fringe view explanation. Some scholars like Joel Baden from his April 24, 2012 book, The Composition of the Pentateuch, argued that Elohist is the only Torah source to report God's command to Abraham to sacrifice his only son, Isaac. This theory falls under the realm of source criticism, and while it's intriguing, it's not widely supported among scholars. Nonetheless, it offers an interesting lens to which to view this story. The fourth interpretation is spiritual interpretation, and it comes from a Jewish tradition which suggests that Ishmael became spiritually dead to Abraham because of his involvement in idolatry. According to the Midrash, and that's the Jewish commentary on Scripture, Ishmael's behavior caused Abraham to send him away, protecting Isaac from negative influences. Going back again to the article, The Only Begotten Son, we find this very helpful explanation. What did Ishmael do? When he was 15 years old, he commenced to bring idols from the street, toyed with them, and worshiped them as he had seen others do. So Sarah saw the son of Hagar the Egyptian, whom she had borne unto Abraham, making sport, in other words, mocking. The Hebrew word mezahek is always being used in the case of idolatry. The commentary goes on to explain that Abraham expelled Ishmael because Ishmael had fallen into idolatry and to prevent him from leading Isaac astray. So Abraham sent him away. For our listeners, it's helpful to understand the extra Jewish commentary underlying this verse. The reason for this is, while this interpretation isn't found directly in the Bible, it reflects the idea that Isaac, as the pure and faithful son, became Abraham's only true heir in a spiritual sense. And the fifth area is a literary device, and that's, in essence, a literary interpretation. In the story of the binding of Isaac, the reference to Isaac as Abraham's only son amplifies the drama of the narrative. By highlighting Isaac's role as the only son, the emotional tension is heightened, illustrating Abraham's ultimate test of faith. For this, I will summarize an extremely in-depth and technical article, Take Your Only Son Isaac, What Happened to Ishmael, by Dr. Philip Yu and Grace Leake. They published that in the binding of Isaac, the narrative intensifies by God referring to Isaac as Abraham's only son, ignoring Ishmael's existence despite Ishmael's being Abraham's firstborn. This literary device focuses the drama on Isaac, highlighting the emotional tension and emphasizing Isaac's importance to Abraham. Early readers of the text, troubled by Ishmael's absence, offered various explanations to reconcile this, including midrashic interpretations and textual alterations. These explanations show that the omission of Ishmael serves to dramatize Isaac's role in the narrative, underscoring themes of faith, sacrifice, and divine testing. So, what Dr. Philip Yu and Grace Leake explain is that early readers wrestled with Ishmael's absence in the narrative, and various midrashic interpretations arose to reconcile this. However, the focus remains on Isaac, emphasizing his role in God's plan and deepening the narrative's emotional and theological weight. As we work our way to a conclusion, we need to examine quickly on Ishmael's relationship to Abraham in the Quran. For this, there is a great deal of misunderstanding of what the Quran actually says about Ishmael, and this is a good place to clear this up. Many Muslims, very incorrectly, believe that Abraham bound Ishmael, not Isaac. Dr. William Lane Craig, from his Reasonable Faith podcast on Islam, Part 1, from January 1st, 2008, said this, and I quote, "But I was in a debate with Jamal Badawi at Texas A&M, and to my surprise, he just became unhinged, particularly when I made the remark that, I didn't think this would get under his skin, I made the remark that in the Quran, it doesn't actually say that Abraham sacrificed Ishmael on the altar. Muslims believe it was Ishmael, not Isaac, that Abraham laid on the altar to sacrifice at God's command. In fact, when you read the Quran, that's not what it says. It says it is Isaac. I thought, how odd that Islam believes this is about Ishmael, when in the Quran, it says it was about Isaac. So I just happened to mention this in the debate, and he just went off the charts. He began interrupting and speaking out of turn and protesting, trying to explain this away and so forth. It was obvious that it touched a real nerve. I suppose because it strikes right at the heart of who you are as a Muslim, that it is Ishmael that is the promised child, and therefore it is they who are really the chosen people." End quote. Back to me. That's an interesting take, and it's a lesson to us all. Ask questions and research these items. You may find, as Dr. Craig did, many are espousing a false belief based on what a book, like in this example, the Quran, never actually said. So where do we conclude today? After exploring multiple angles, from historical, legal, and even spiritual interpretations, it becomes clear to me that Isaac's designation as Abraham's only son is not a contradiction, but a profound theological truth. I am landing on the first example, the theological interpretation, as the right one here. Isaac wasn't Abraham's only son biologically, but he was the only son of the covenant, the one through whom God's promise would be fulfilled. The story points us to a deeper understanding of God's promises. Isaac's unique role foreshadows the coming of another son, Jesus, who would fulfill the ultimate covenant of salvation for all of humankind. The phrase only son isn't just about lineage or birth order. It's about the divine calling and purpose that transcends human understanding. So next time you read about this passage, remember, it's not about numbers and who was born first, but about covenant and calling. Next week, we'll dive into another tough question. How could the sons of Heth have been in Hebron in 2050 BC when their kingdom was in what is now modern Turkey? This will be a fascinating exploration into archaeology and ancient history from Genesis 23. Remember, studying the Bible isn't just about finding answers. It's about asking the right questions. And thanks for listening. As always, we love hearing from our listeners. You may reach us at our website, BibleDifficultiesAndAnswers.podbean.com, or you may reach out to me directly at our email address, BibleDifficultiesAndAnswers@gmail.com, with any questions, comments, concerns, fits of righteous indignation, or just to say hi. I'm always glad to hear from our listeners. Also, please like and subscribe to this podcast. Tell a friend or two as well. And also write a review and give it a 5-star rating on Apple Podcast, Podbean, Spotify, YouTube, or any of your venues of choice. It really does help get the word out about the most amazing book ever written. Again, I'm Lance Smith. Until next time, I wish you good luck, good health, and God bless. So long, everybody.